Sad fact of life, most of the people you are introduced to in a horror movie won't make it to the credits. Fortunately, there remains a curtain call of badass women who sadly don't make it to the end of their respective film due to a delightful combination of slashers, monsters, or demonic puppets. Many formidable ladies have gone down in the annals of horror history as gone too soon. So with that in mind then, I'm Ellie with What Culture here with the best non-final girls in horror movies. Alison Kerry in Saw 1, 2 and 3. Alison Kerry is an exemplary police officer, one of the very first assigned to work the Jigsaw case in the Saw franchise. Yes, she's also a workaholic, but that comes with the territory when tracking down serial killers with a penchant for nightmarishly twisted games. Kerry demonstrates her ability as an investigator throughout her run on the franchise, spotting clues where others fail to. She is the first person to realise that Jigsaw watches his games when she finds his peephole. She is also seen to be extremely loyal. She is haunted by the disappearance of former Flame and partner Eric Matthews to the point where she hallucinates him. In a horrifically twisted turn, Kerry is captured and locked into one of the iconic traps. Her career is thrown in her face as the reason for her predicament, as she is informed that she prefers the company of dead bodies to live ones. Her task is to retrieve a key from a beaker full of acid, which she manages to do despite the searing pain. In utterly depressing fashion, Kerry discovers the useless key was a red herring. She has just enough time to look up and see Amanda, the architect of her situation, before her ribcage is torn apart by the trap. An empowered detective who hung tough for a long time in a brutal cinematic universe, Kerry deserved better than a barbaric trap she had no hope of escaping. Jenna Montgomery in Friday the 13th. An unexpected bright patch of the clunky 2009 remake of Friday the 13th was Danielle Panabaker's Jenna Montgomery. Initially shaping up to be the final girl before her demise towards the climax of the movie, Jenna is kind and sweet from the onset of the film. She becomes even more sympathetic to the audience when viewed in contrast to her privileged brat of a boyfriend, the aptly named Trent. In amongst the group of obnoxious friends so cringeworthy that viewers start rooting for Jason, Jenna is quite literally the only bright spot. This makes it all the more heartbreakingly unfair when she realizes her boyfriend is sleeping with her best friend in the midst of the usual Friday the 13th chaos. She and Clay are the first to spot Jason hauling a corpse out of sight. Despite her likable nature and shaping up to operate as the main love interest of lead protagonist Clay, Jenna just can't catch a break. She is duly dispatched by Jason and his trusty machete in a desperate attempt to free Clay's sister Whitney from Jason's lair towards the finale. The demise of Clay's romantic interest adds an extra layer of impact to the death of a fan-favourite character. Probably a good thing that they decided to scrap her original death where Jason bludgeons her with a fire extinguisher after she and Clay discuss romantic plans. The culmination of a run of appalling luck for poor Jenna, nice girls just don't do well in horror films. Kia Waterson in Freddy vs. Jason. You're not even scary. Anybody brave enough to say those words to Freddy Krueger's face, let alone accuse him of using his knives to compensate for something, is a horror character worthy of mention. Kia Waterson, played by none other than Destiny's Child's Kelly Rowland from 2003's slasher bonanza Freddy vs. Jason, is no exception. Kia starts the film off with several unlikable characteristics, such as needlessly bullying a nerdy kid who tries to hit on Laurie, but this speaks volumes to how much of a lasting impression she ultimately leaves. A constant source of support to protagonist Laurie throughout the film, Kia's most memorable moments ultimately come during her final ones. In an attempt to transport Jason Voorhees' sleeping body to a site where they may unleash him on Krueger, things go horribly wrong with the van crashing off the road. Kia fearlessly distracts Krueger from Laurie and Will by mercilessly mocking the scarred psychopath, allowing the pair to escape unscathed. Krueger is understandably upset by Kia's attacks and is irritated to a point rarely exhibited by the focal point of the Nightmare on Elm Street series. Sadly for Kia, Freddy indicates with a bladed finger that Jason is standing right behind her as she unleashes her verbal beatdown. Kia is slashed by Jason with such force that she flies into a tree several meters away. It is clearly advisable not to make any jokes about Mr. Krueger's masculinity or lack thereof. Clear Rivers in Final Destination 1 and 2. Featuring a vengeful iteration of Death who does not take being cheated lightly, the Final Destination series often comes off as more of a dark comedy than a serious horror franchise, after featuring some of the more hilariously morbid ways to snuff it ever seen on screen. The series does, however, play home to Clear Rivers, one of the more resourceful non-final girls seen in horror films to date. It speaks volumes to the richness of Clear's character that producers chose to bring her back for Final Destination 2 over Alex Browning, the central protagonist of the original. A survivor of the infamous Flight 180 explosion from Final Destination, Clear demonstrated rarely seen powers of sensibility within the horror genre in the sequel, voluntarily committing herself to a psychiatric ward for protection. Despite being distraught over Alex's death, taking place off-screen since the events of the first film, Clear fights through her fear and is instrumental in figuring out that only new life can cheat death. Tragically for her, however, death had not forgotten her escape from the deadly inferno of Flight 180. Rushing to find Eugene at the hospital, Clear accidentally knocks a plug in his room out, causing a spark. The room has steadily been filled with oxygen, which ignites and instantly incinerates both Clear and Eugene in apocalyptic fashion. A fiery end for one of the smarter non-final girls, sadly not quite smart enough to cheat death. Taryn White in A Nightmare on Elm Street 3: Dream Warriors. The very definition of a dream warrior, Taryn White goes down as one of Freddy Krueger's more formidable female victims. She is one of the Elm Street kids, the surviving children of the parents who burned the vile serial child murderer's physical form alive many years ago. Taryn is also a former drug addict trying to keep herself clean. Her steely resolve is demonstrated by scornfully dismissing a guard who attempts to bribe her into sex with the promise of drugs. Taryn's dream power in this installment of A Nightmare on Elm Street certainly didn't hurt her credentials either. Making her beautiful and bad, Taryn is transformed by her power into a switchblade-wielding biker badass, one capable of going toe-to-toe with Krueger himself. Unfortunately, Taryn's enviable powers and powerful backstory aren't enough to grab herself a spot in the film's finale. She finds herself face to face with Krueger and is killed despite a valiant effort. Even her superhero-esque alter ego crumbles as Freddy exploits her greatest fear by swapping the blades on his gloves for syringes. A death soaked in the cruelest of irony for the recovering addict, and incidentally one of the legendary slasher's most immortal kills. Kate Schmidt in Fear Street 1994. Kate Schmidt was one of the more pleasant surprises of the first installment of Fear Street. Wonderfully played by Julia Raywold, Kate is a cheerleader who makes money selling drugs on the side, hoping that the carefully saved money will buy her a life away from Shadyside. Despite her propensity for dealing narcotics, Kate is a fiercely loyal friend who never falters, even in the face of unexplained wave of evil sweeping the area. Her most immortal moment comes when defending Dina and Sam from Skull Mask. Kate uses a lighter and a can of hairspray to create an improvised flamethrower to keep him at bay, in a scene that would put Stranger Things' Murray Bauman to shame. It only seems just that such an immortal supporting character would meet an immortal end, and Kate does exactly that in Fear Street 1994's most shocking sequence. Kate is stabbed while struggling with one of the Shadyside killers before he proceeds to feed her head through a cake slicer. Seeing one of the most likable characters in the new series bite the dust in such appalling fashion left viewers absolutely aghast. Kate was developing into such a fan favourite that the jaw-dropping brutality involved in her death had much more of an emotional impact on viewers than your run-of-the-mill gore fest. As such, while she didn't make it to the end of Fear Street, Kate will live on as one of the more popular non-final girls to make their bow. Helen Shivers in I Know What You Did Last Summer. Superbly played by Sarah Michelle Gellar, I Know What You Did Last Summer's Helen Shivers is contemporarily regarded as one of the greatest non-final girls in history. Simply put, a key element behind the success of Helen's lasting impression is that she's just a cool character, effortlessly slotting in amongst the popular kids while managing to avoid the more obnoxious traits associated with such girls. Gellar's Helen was positively received by fans, many of whom preferred her to Jennifer Love Hewitt's lead protagonist Julie James. This may be due in some part to the fact that Jennifer Love Hewitt spends the majority of the film bogged down by stereotypical horror girl typecasting, too busy screaming her head off to contribute anything useful. While she admittedly does also do a lot of screaming, Shivers shows she is willing to fight to survive, alive. Look no further than her bucking the stereotypical image of a pageant queen by hurling herself from a third-story window to escape the film's hook-wielding killer, or kicking out the window of a police car. Even after seeing her sister's brutally murdered body and falling several stories, Helen refuses to give up her bid for freedom. This makes it all the more heartbreaking when the killer catches up with her and she is bludgeoned to death. Safety within eyeshot, screams drowned out by the passing parade. Helen sadly highlights a common trait of many great non-final girls, often resulting in their status as such, lacking the ability to make a quick getaway. Juno Kaplan in The Descent 1 and 2. While The Descent's Beth or Sam are other examples of top-tier non-final girls, Natalie Mendoza's Juno takes the accolade of Best Non-Final Girl from 2005's terrifying subterranean horror. The Descent tells the tale of a caving adventure gone appallingly wrong. A caving trip meant to renew the bonds of friendship between the group swiftly turns Hadean as they are trapped in a cave system revealed to be brimming with crawlers, nightmarish humanoid creatures who hunt them through the terrifying darkness. Strangely, Juno is incredibly unlikable for several reasons. She gets the group trapped in the first place by revealing they are in a system that only she knew about, and she is also revealed to later have had an affair with main protagonist Sarah's husband before his death. Last but not least, she accidentally kills Beth, mistaking her for a crawler. Contrastingly, however, Juno unwaveringly refuses to leave Sarah behind, even in the face of the hellish crawlers. Ultimately, what lands Juno on this list is just how much of a straight-up badass she is. Already an expert climber and caver, she manages to survive underground with the monstrous creatures, even after Sarah cripples her with a pickaxe and leaves her for dead. By the time the sequel rolled around, her time underground had left her a crawler-killing expert. It takes the largest lead crawler to finally bring an end to one of the more complex supporting characters in horror history. Tatum Riley in Scream. The quintessential non-final girl features in 1996's Scream, Tatum Riley. Played by Rose McGowan, Tatum is a significant character within Scream canon, despite only appearing in the very first installment. A popular high schooler, she is the younger sister of Scream mainstay Sheriff Dewey Riley, and best friend to series protagonist Neve Campbell's Sidney Prescott. Tatum makes quite an impression with her sharp tongue and quick wit, no matter what scene she's in. She also holds the distinction of being the first character to name Ghostface, mocking the killer when she believes it is Randy in disguise. McGowan's character has the signature non-girl badass streak within her as well. Even when the killer slices her arm, blocking her escape, Tatum fights back like a cornered wildcat. After clotheslining Ghostface with the fridge door, she then proceeds to pelt him with beer bottles. Stunning the killer after one bottle catches him square in the face, Tatum vaults over him in almost Mission Impossible-esque fashion. Tatum's only undoing is her choice of escape routes. Attempting to escape through a cat flap in the garage door, she gets stuck. From there, Ghostface proceeds to operate the garage door, which lifts a struggling Tatum and crushes her spine in the mechanism. It is never revealed whether it was Billy or her own boyfriend Stu wearing the mask when she died, but the iconic manner of her death, coupled with the popularity of her character, gives Tatum Riley arguably the strongest non-final girl legacy out there.
Lorraine Day, X. At the center of Ty West X and Pearl is a mesmerizing Mia Goth, who plays the eerie Pearl in both pictures, but also plays the more heroic soul survivor Maxine in 2022's X. Away from Final Girl Maxine, one other major highlight of X is Jenna Ortega's Lorraine Day. That movie centers on a group who rent a property on an old couple's farm, where the intent is to shoot a porn film. While filming does indeed start to take place, what also starts up is the murderous intent of the elderly Pearl and Howard. For Lorraine, she's the timid girlfriend of director RJ and is just there as a spare body to help with the shoot. That is, until Lorraine decides she'd like to partake in a scene of her own, against the wishes of RJ, but given the green light by producer Wayne. Throughout X, Ortega's character really comes into her own, growing in confidence and showing some great fire right up until the film's final few minutes, where she's shot dead by Howard, leaving Maxine as the movie's sole survivor. Beatrice Johnson, American Mary. From Jen and Sylvia Soska, 2012's American Mary tells the story of medical student turned body modification specialist Mary Mason. Taking the job at a strip club to help with her school fees, Mary's budding surgical career sees her called to hand to save one of the dodgy owner of the club's friends. From there, school is out and Mary is very much in the body mod game. As part of this tale, Mary becomes friends with Beatrice, a dancer at the club and someone who has undergone multiple surgeries to get an appearance similar to Betty Boop. And while American Mary is a dark and gory picture, Beatrice is a breath of fresh air, bringing a lightness and warmth, and throwing out some fantastic, expletive-laden one-liners. Completely unrecognizable, it's Soska's regular Tristan Risk under the Beatrice makeup, and Risk's delivery and sheer presence so often steals the show whenever Beatrice is on screen. Annie Brackett, Halloween. The Halloween franchise is responsible for likely the greatest final girl in horror history, and it also has several impressive non-final girls amongst its 13 movies. While there was a temptation to go with Rachel Carruthers of Halloween's 4 and 5 here, it's Annie Brackett who gets the nod. Played by Nancy Loomis, Annie is one of the best friends of Jamie Lee Curtis's Laurie Strode, and she unfortunately doesn't survive the night he came home back in 1978. Still, Annie was a great addition to John Carpenter's picture, with her a more sensible, sarcastic, and responsible figure than her and Laurie's other best pal, Linda. Annie also has the distinction of being the daughter of Sheriff Brackett, which brings a different dynamic to the table when she ends up dead at the hands of Michael, and this news makes its way to Brackett at the start of Halloween 2. For Rob Zombie's take on Halloween, Annie, as played by Danielle Harris, did actually survive the first film, although she was brutally butchered by the Shape in one of the most memorable sequences from Zombie's opinion split in Halloween 2. Reese Wilson, Urban Legend, and Urban Legend's final cut. Jamie Blanks' Urban Legend focuses on a college campus at the center of a murder spree from a Parker-adorned killer who offs their victims in ways that mimic classic urban legends. While it's Alicia Witt's Natalie in the final girl role here, with the killer revealed to be her best pal Brenda, one scene-stealing supporting character is Reese Wilson, as played by the brilliant Loretta Devine. Reese is a campus cop seen in both Urban Legend and Urban Legend's final cut, with her just such an engaging presence you want to see more of, idolising Pam Grier, and in particular Grier's turn as Foxy Brown. Reese is the most likeable figure of both of these movies, and she's actually incredibly proactive and useful. What a surprise! When Reese hears of an attack on someone, she heads to the scene to check it out. When the bodies start to pile up, she requests more security. When that request is refused by the dean, she calls him an asshole. And when Brenda is about to finally kill Natalie, it's Reese who appears to shoot the deranged lunatic. Reese Wilson, man, one of 90s horror's most underappreciated characters. KM14 Jason X. Yes, your host will forever die on the hill that Jason X is a damn fun movie, though I am fully aware that many think the film is utter trash. And that's fine, but even those naysayers can't deny how badass the character Lisa Ryder's KM14 is. Having been cryogenically frozen, Jason Voorhees awakens on a spaceship in the year 2463. Yeah, that in itself is quite the sentence. But Jason X at least fully leans into the cheese of this entire situation, as highlighted perfectly by KM14, an ass-kicking android. After receiving an upgrade midway through Jason X, this android becomes more than a match for Jason, beating the piss out of Crystal Lake's most infamous sword and shooting off his arms, legs, and head. Of course, Jason's remains conveniently fall into a machine which turns him into Uber Jason, and no, not like the Uber taxi and takeaway service, but now complete with his own upgrade, Jason easily betters KM14 in their next meeting, punching her head off in similar fashion to poor Jules in Jason Takes Manhattan. Still, by the end of Jason X, KM14's still functioning head is promised a new body from a kind of lover sooner on. Yeah, Jason X is quite the unique trip. Anne-Marie McCoy, Candyman 1992 and 2021. When people think of 1992's Candyman, they'll think of Daniel Robitaille and Helen Lyle. Likewise, when thinking of the 2021 Candyman, thoughts immediately turn to Anthony McCoy and Bree Cartwright. One person often overlooked in both of these movies, though, is Anne-Marie McCoy, played by Vanessa Williams. Anne-Marie is a fascinating character who undergoes as much trauma as pretty much anyone else in the entire Candyman franchise. Some of the non-final girls featured on this list are here for their entertainment value, or for just how badass they were. But Anne-Marie is here for how tragic a figure she paints, and for how well written she's been in her 2 appearances. Of course, that character has her son Anthony taken by the Candyman in the 1992 movie, with her left to discover a bloody, empty crib. While the end of that picture saw Helen sacrifice herself to save the youngster, the poor child would still end up entangled in the Candyman lore, with the adult Anthony becoming part of the Candyman hive by the time the 2021 movie comes to a close. Sybil Bennett, Silent Hill. One of the greatest characters of the first few seasons of The Walking Dead was clearly Andrea, but 4 years before landing that role, Laurie Holden was tasked with playing Sybil Bennett in 2006's Silent Hill. To say Sybil was done dirty by Silent Hill's end, that would be a massive understatement, with this police officer doing everything within her power to help Rose, whose adopted daughter had gone missing in the eerie, unnerving titular town. Pyramid Head and all manner of twisted creatures in Sybil and Rose's way as they attempt to find young Sharon and unravel the mystery of Silent Hill. But in a shock few saw coming, Sybil winds up burned alive during the final act. It's a jarring, jaw-dropping demise for a fearless character who did so much to help out, like a total stranger. And it's a fate that still feels so cruel even all these years later. Brenda Meeks, the Scary Movie franchise. Yes, is it somewhat cheating to include the Scary Movie franchise here? Possibly, but this parody comedy series does feature all kinds of serial killers, ghosts, aliens, and various other things synonymous with horror. As such, I'm using that as an excuse to spotlight Regina Hall's show-stealing Brenda Meeks, a character who appeared alongside final girl Cindy Campbell in the first 4 Scary Movies. While Anna Faris's Cindy carries out the dumb, often mocked actions associated with the classic final girl tropes of years gone by, Brenda is the wise voice of reason who'll berate her pal for doing, stupid, nonsensical things. Essentially, Hall's character reacts in the same way the audience does to certain horror movies, and the decisions made in them. It also makes it all the more entertaining that Brenda is ready to fight anyone at a moment's notice, and quick to fire out an insult or two. Of course, all of that is only possible due to the brilliant performances of Regina Hall, who was always a must-see part of those Scary Movies, particularly the first 2. Mindy Meeks Martin, Scream 2022 and Scream 6. Yes, this is our token Scream mention. Get angry in the comments, please don't really. But while the recent 2 Scream movies have positioned Sam and Tara Carpenter as their final girls, along for the ride has also been Mindy Meeks Martin. The niece of franchise fave Randy, Mindy shares a lot in common with her uncle, namely, she's a major horror nerd. As with Randy, this extensive knowledge comes in handy when Mindy and her friends, and her brother Chad, try to avoid the cliches of the genre once they're in the crosshairs of Ghostface. This expertise also comes in useful when Mindy tries to establish who's most likely to be under the Ghostface mask, something which she succeeds in doing when identifying Ethan as one of the killers in Scream 6. Not just is Mindy's understanding of horror a key trait of hers, but Jasmine Savoy Brown's character is quite the sassy badass, firmly taking no BS from anybody in her 2 appearances so far. Always with a quip or snarky remark to hand, Mindy Meeks Martin is the best of the new characters introduced in these past 2 Scream films, and she's probably one of the very best in the entire franchise. Vasquez, Aliens. Part science fiction film, part action movie, and all laced in a glorious sheen of horror, James Cameron's Aliens is one of the all-time great sequels. It also happens to have one of the all-time great non-final girls. For the Alien franchise, of course, the long-standing final girl is Ellen Ripley, and Vasquez was one of those, finding themselves fighting alongside Ripley in 1986's Aliens. After spending 57 years in stasis, poor Ripley is coerced into returning to the scene of her horrors by the Weyland-Yutani group. But fear not, for our central protagonist has a bunch of colonial marines along for that ride, and amongst them is Vasquez. Surprisingly, her first ever acting role, Jeanette Goldstein absolutely kills it in the Vasquez role, delivering a character fondly remembered to this very day. In a Marines team dripping with machismo, Vasquez is the baddest of the bad, the toughest of the tough, and the one you'd want watching your back if you're facing off with something as utterly chilling as a xenomorph.
Terry Fisher, The Howling. In Joe Dante's werewolf flick, a news anchor called Karen White finds herself being tormented by serial killer Eddie Quist. Shaken by the experience, her counsellor encourages her to spend time at a relaxing resort. Little does Karen know, the estate is a front for a werewolf cult called the Colony. Now, it makes sense that Karen is the lead, since her encounter with Eddie jumpstarts the whole plot. However, Karen is left so rattled she doesn't do much until the last few minutes. Instead, it's her best friend, Terry Fisher, who gets things done. Suspecting Eddie has connections to the resort, Terry vows to get to the bottom of everything. While researching supernatural lore at the library, she notices the killings mentioned in the books are similar to the suspicious deaths near the resort. After locating a cabin that Eddie frequented, she takes pictures of any potential evidence. When a demonic wolfman bursts in, Terry hacks the creature's hands off, forcing it to retreat. In a nutshell, Terry is frickin' awesome. Tragically, she's mauled to death by a shape-shifting beastie immediately after finding proof Eddie is a part of the colony. Since Terry did 99% of the legwork though, she was more deserving of the final girl title than Karen was. Joan Levin, Cube. Vincenzo Natali's surreal head-scratcher centres around a group of strangers trapped inside a colossal booby-trapped maze. One member, called Quinton, elects himself as leader, doing what he can to find practical solutions to escape. The others grow despondent, especially a math student called Levin, who believes she has nothing to contribute. But since Levin is a math whiz, she's the one who realizes there's a numerical pattern to each room. So not only does she realize which ones are trapped, she deduces which room leads to the exit. Unfortunately, Quinton loses his mind by the time Levin finds the way out, causing him to turn on the others. Just as Levin is about to leave, she's impaled through the heart by Quinton, who dies moments later. In the end, the only person who makes it out alive is an autistic savant called Kazan. Now, to be fair, having Kazan as the sole survivor was deeply unexpected, since he initially seemed useless. He was also instrumental in cracking the room's more complex patterns, thanks to his aptitude for math, so it is refreshing to see him survive. Having said that, however, Levin would have been a more logical choice. After all, she figured out how the labyrinth was structured, how big it was, how it worked, and showed Kazan how to help them. If it wasn't for her, the group would have stood zero chance of escaping. Jamie Lloyd, Halloween, The Curse of Michael Myers. Even though Halloween 4 to 6 are a mess, at least they try to have an overarching narrative. Throughout this pseudo-trilogy, Michael Myers returns to Haddonfield to kill Jamie Lloyd, who is his last living relative, to the best of his knowledge. In the 6th installment, Halloween, The Curse of Michael Myers, Jamie gives birth to a boy called Stephen, compelling the mute stalker to track her down yet again. Now that Jamie has to protect her son, the stakes have never been higher for her. Since Jamie is the daughter of Michael's arch-nemesis, Laurie Strode, it seems fitting the story would culminate with the two squaring off. However, Michael skewers Jamie to death in the first act, putting an abrupt end to her story arc. After she meets her maker, the plot suddenly shifts to Cara and Tommy, the latter played by a young Paul Rudd, no less, who only have a loose connection to Laurie and Michael. Not only was Jamie directly tied to the franchise's two central characters, she had already faced the Shape twice before. Having the protagonist from the last two installments killed off in the opening act and replaced with two nobodies was downright nonsensical. Barb, Black Christmas. In Bob Clark's proto-slasher, a group of sorority sisters are left deeply unnerved after receiving phone calls from a serial killer called Billy. Fortunately, the group is held together by their most besotted member, Barb. Coming across as one-dimensional at first, Barb is an extremely layered character, which is accentuated by Margot Kidder's powerful performance. Due to her aggressive and cantankerous manner, it's easy to assume Barb only cares about herself. But when the caller threatens her friends, Barb snatches the phone and humiliates the creep. When Billy threatens to butcher her, she laughs it off, rallying her fraternity not to give in to fear. But that's not all. When several students go missing, aka murdered, Barb marches to the police station to make a report. When the cops dismiss the case, Barb goes ballistic, once again showing how loyal she is to her sorority. Sadly, Barb's defiant behaviour is what inspired Billy to take her out. Nevertheless, she would have made a better leading lady than Jess, who has none of the qualities of a final girl. The only time Jess shows initiative is when she beats Peter to death with a fire poker under the belief he's the crazed caller. Since this theory is later proven to be false, it's apparent Jess didn't contribute much in terms of helping her friends or bringing Billy to justice. Liz Hunter, Wolf Creek. Inspired by the real-life murders in Australia during the 1990s, Wolf Creek follows a trio of backpackers, Liz, Christy and Ben, who are kidnapped by a serial killer called Mick Taylor. After Liz breaks free from her restraints, she heads to Mick's garage where she sees the sicko torturing Christy. From here on out, Liz becomes a total badass. She burns her car to distract Mick long enough to rescue Christy. Upon his return, she shoots him in the neck with a hunting rifle. When Liz realizes Mick is still alive, she knocks his vehicle off a cliff so he can't drive after them. Seeing how hysterical Christy is, Liz takes it upon herself to find a vehicle to flee, knowing it's likely Mick will kill her before she succeeds, which is exactly what happens. She orders Christy to leave if she takes longer than 5 minutes. Although Christy looks like she gets away, Mick catches up and shoots her dead. Just as it feels like the story is wrapping up, the scene cuts to Ben trapped in a mine shaft where Mick left him. After escaping from his confines, Ben is taken to safety by a Swedish couple. Although it's nice to see one person survive, why did it have to be Ben? Of the three main characters, he had the least screen time. On top of that, he was absent during the bulk of the conflict, to the point where it was easy to forget he was in the movie in the first place. If anyone were to live, it should have been Liz, since she did everything in her power to kill Mick and save her friends. Danny Wilkins, The Belko Experiment. In the James Gunn written horror The Belko Experiment, employees at the Belko Company are sealed in the building and ordered to murder each other until only one remains. Even though there are 80 employees, one person who immediately stands out is Danny Wilkins, who had the misfortune of joining Belko that very day. Since Danny is timid and doesn't know her way around the building, she looks like she'll be the first victim. On the contrary, Danny repeatedly proves to be a born survivor. She hides when she needs to and doesn't take risks unless it's necessary. Although she avoids confrontation, she fights off several workers when push comes to shove. Danny proves to be selfless, since she rescues several colleagues despite having no personal attachment to them. When Danny barely survives a bloodbath in the elevator, all signs point to her being the final girl. But as she gets off the lift, she's fatally shot in the head. Danny fared better than most since she was the 77th victim in this barbaric experiment. But considering how intelligent and courageous she was, she should have survived the whole ordeal. Sally Hardesty, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. When it comes to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre saga, the bad far outweighs the good. With that said, 2022's Texas Chainsaw Massacre is definitely among the weakest entries. The Legacy sequel is filled with characters that are one-note, uninteresting and unlikable. Also, it's hard to sympathize with the main ensemble since the story kicks things off with them chucking Leatherface's carer out of her house. When her eviction causes her to have a fatal heart attack, nobody can blame Leatherface for venting his frustration the only way he knows how. But when the OG final girl, Sally Hardesty, bursts onto the scene, this dud seemed like it could redeem itself. Being the original heroine, the third act was set up as if Sally was about to throw down with her longtime rival, especially since this was her first appearance in the franchise in almost 50 years. Instead, Leatherface guts Sally like a fish barely a minute after she appears. Not only should Sally have lived on, she should have been the one who put Leatherface down for good. Otherwise, what was the point in her return except to serve as a glorified cameo?